Hi guys, Stevi here. We just got a kind of random fun video here today. So as some of you may know, I went from 0 to passing the N1 in about 18 months, and we've actually got a dedicated video where I break that down, which you can find somewhere, probably in the description. Anyway, you're smart, you'll figure it out. More importantly, it's been about 6 years since then. Time passes so fast. So I've been studying Japanese for about 7 years in total. And to celebrate this, today, here we have 7 lessons I've learned in the last 7 years that I think will help you learn Japanese and really, kanji stuff aside, any other language. So here goes. 1. We learn languages by interacting with them. The first point is pretty basic, but it's the foundation that everything else sits upon. If you consume media in Japanese and you understand some of the messages, dialogue, sentences, utterances, phrases, words, whatever, within that media, you will make progress, period. Unfortunately, a lot of learners spend a lot of time learning about Japanese, but they spend very little time actually using Japanese. As a result, they make much slower progress than they could make if they make progress at all. This is really important, so I'm going to phrase it differently. What all successful language learners have in common is that in some way or another they have spent a lot of time interacting with their target language. Now I know, this is kind of a difficult hurdle. You need to interact with Japanese to learn it, but you also need to reach a certain skill level before it really becomes practical to begin consuming content in Japanese. This leads me to my next point. 2. Not everything in a language is equally important. To demonstrate this, we ran an analysis of all the words in the subtitles of Japanese Netflix. This provides some really interesting food for thought. If you select a word at random, there is a 10% chance it will be one of 3 things: no, da, or wa. There's a 50% chance that it will be one of 45 things, such as iru, suru, or nai. Now, knowing words like is, do, and not won't really enable you to understand any sentence, so this isn't really very helpful. It basically just makes the language look less foreign. Let's continue. There's an 80% chance that a random word will be one of 1,443 words, a 90% chance that it will be one of 5,243 words, a 95% chance that it will be one of 12,041 words, and a 99% chance that it will be one of 37,447 words. As you can see, you get a pretty reasonable return on your effort to learn the first 1,500 words or so. And then you get increasingly less value out of each new word you learn from there. The reason for this is that words are shortcuts for ideas. Many ideas pertain to a specific thing. Words like tablespoon or fluid ounce are really important for cooking, for example, but basically useless everywhere else. There are 2 things I want you to take away from this. 1. As a beginner, your most important job is to learn these extremely common 1,500 words that show up everywhere. As you get closer to 1,500 words known, it becomes more likely that you will be able to find a piece of content that you find both accessible and interesting. This is where the real learning begins. 2. Once you've got those super common words down, it's important to take charge of your own learning. The time you spend doing flashcards is more likely to benefit you if the words you are learning are actually relevant to the sort of media you enjoy consuming. 3. Use flashcards, but don't take them too seriously. While writing that second takeaway, I realized that I'd make an assumption that might not be obvious. You should be using a spaced repetition system, also known as SRS, such as Migaku memory or Anki, to learn vocabulary words. We have a pretty in-depth blog post on how spaced repetition works, but the basic idea is that it's an algorithm that periodically nudges you to review flashcards. Each day you will be given a few new things to learn and several old things to review. As you review particular things more often and get them right more often, you will be asked to review them less and less often. You can further enhance the benefits of the SRS by making these flashcards yourself from content you consume. Compared to just being quizzed on random words that don't mean anything to you, it's easier to remember words if they are supported by images, audio, and context from content you are familiar with. This creates a powerful filtering effect. More of your study time goes to the things you struggle with and less gets wasted on things you know well. So, if you're not using SRS supported flashcards already, start. It's basically a superpower. But with great power comes great responsibility. You see, there are a lot of ways you can optimize your flashcards and SRS. Tons. You could literally invest hundreds of hours into this. As an SRS power user who has learned 2 foreign languages to a very high level, don't. Instead, invest that time into your immersion. We have a video about what good flashcards look like and how to study them. It will be linked in the description. It's a 15-minute watch and it's all you need to know as a beginner. Down the road, if it looks like you'll be sticking with SRS for the long term, you can begin experimenting with optimizing your SRS. I didn't. Personally, I just set it up once, then focus on immersion, and that's obviously worked pretty well for me. Whatever you do, don't let the pursuit of perfection get in the way of getting the job done, especially as a beginner. You're better off remembering 80% of 1,000 words than 95% of 500 words, especially if you currently know 0 words. 4. Going abroad doesn't mean you'll learn a language. Phew, that was kind of a rant. Since that point was a bit longer, here's one that's short and bitter. Going to Japan doesn't guarantee that you will learn Japanese, it just guarantees that you will have opportunities to use Japanese. We all know people who have lived in a country for many years, sometimes 20 or 30, and still don't really speak the local language. Most people are no different. If you're not already making a serious effort to learn Japanese at home, there's a high chance you don't do so in Japan either. The thing is, thanks to the internet, you have opportunities to use Japanese no matter where you are. I like to think of going abroad as being like a force multiplier. If you're spending a lot of time in your target language at home, going abroad will give you a boost on top of that. Conversely, if you're not really doing anything in your target language, you won't magically begin using it just because you move abroad. You'll make friends that speak your native language and learn how to get around despite not knowing their country's language. 5. Forced mining to get through your first show in another language. A big part of your language progress will come as a byproduct of simply enjoying yourself in that language. There are 2 bits of bad news here. One is that, as mentioned, until you know about 1,500 words, it will be difficult to find a piece of content that is both accessible and enjoyable. 2 is that, unfortunately, no matter how much you prepare, the first piece of content you consume in another language is going to be difficult. The reason for this is scope. When you're drilling flashcards, you're only engaging with the language one isolated sentence at a time. When you step up to a piece of actual content, no matter what it is, this scope expands. You're consuming a bunch of sentences that work together, and failing to understand previous sentences will blur your understanding of later ones. This is a step up in difficulty and will be overwhelming at first, but if you want to succeed in learning a language, it's a hurdle you need to overcome eventually. My personal solution to this is what I call forced mining. Mining is short for sentence mining. It is the simple act of stumbling into sentences while consuming content and turning them into flashcards. Normally, you would be strict with this process. It's called sentence mining because you're looking for gold after all. This means that you only make flashcards out of sentences that contain one piece of new information. For example, you know all of the words in a sentence but one. They also shouldn't be too long or too short. Should contain some useful context and should seem useful to you. Forced mining is something that you can do after you learn about 1,000 words and are beginning to think about trying to watch your first series without the support of native language subtitles. I call it forced mining because we're in part ignoring our normal principles of sentence mining. You're going to watch the first episode of a series you enjoy or are interested in and go through it super intensively. Look up every unknown word and use Google, a translation tool, or AI to break down every sentence. As you do this, make flashcards out of everything you don't know. If you stumble into a sentence that contains only one unknown word, awesome. Make a sentence card. If not, make vocabulary cards. A word in your target language goes on the front of the card and its translation goes on the back of the card. Try to prioritize nouns when creating vocabulary cards. Verbs and adjectives tend to be easier to learn in full sentences, while nouns, especially concrete nouns like house, dog, or window, can often be just as easily remembered using vocabulary cards. So, if you find a sentence with 3 unknown words, 2 nouns and 1 verb, create vocabulary cards for the nouns first, and then create a sentence card for the verb. I'd also recommend first going through the entire show and mining any sentence that qualifies as a one-target sentence. Then go through the show again. Having already mined some words can sometimes unlock other sentences, as they may now qualify as one-target sentences as well. Once you've done this, the grind begins. Once per day, watch that first episode actively, either with no subtitles or with Japanese subtitles, and do your best to follow along. You won't get much at first, and that's okay. Next, Extract the audio of the show to an MP3 file, put it on your phone or iPod and listen to it intermittently throughout the day. Literally just tune in for a minute or two here and there when you get a chance to do so. As you do this, also start working through those flashcards you made. This is especially powerful if you have the audio with you throughout the day. You don't have to listen to it constantly, but there are many moments when you're walking somewhere or doing something that doesn't require your full attention. Put in your earphones during that 10-minute walk to the grocery store or those 5 minutes on the way to the station. All that time adds up. In the beginning it won't be easy, I won't lie, but if you stick with it, two beautiful things will happen. First, you'll completely internalize the voices of each actor, making it much easier to distinguish the words they are saying. Second, you'll slowly find it much easier to follow and understand what is being said. You've already gone over the show, looked up all the unknown words and figured out what all the sentences mean. Now you just need repetition to get your listening ability up to speed. At first, when you listen to an episode, you will miss a lot of words. After studying it and listening to it a few more times, you will start to follow along somewhat. But there will still be a delay between hearing the audio and your brain processing the meaning. At some point, through all that repetition, your understanding of what is being said will become almost instantaneous. While you're going through this process, you can continue watching the show or other shows, as usual of course. All I recommend is that each day you take some of your regular learning time and invest it into rewatching and listening to this specific episode. Once you've reached a point where you can understand this specific episode perfectly, you can move on to the next one, either from the same show or a different one. It's important to follow your interests here. If after listening to this episode repeatedly you find yourself getting sick of the show, you should move on. The best shows and episodes for this kind of practice are the ones you are genuinely excited about. Each time you do this, it will get easier and the time and repetition it takes to reach an almost perfect understanding of an episode will get shorter. As your vocabulary increases, there will be less words to mine from each episode of a series, meaning that the grinding step takes less time. To be extra efficient, you can also focus on only watching shows from one specific genre for now. Eventually, you will have watched enough series within a genre and learned enough specific vocabulary to that genre that forced mining is no longer necessary. You will be able to watch everything within that genre normally. From this point, you can begin forced mining a new genre and repeat the process again. But again, your interest and level of hype for a specific show or episode are much more important than sticking to a specific genre. This advice is just for the min-maxers among us. 6. Don't just watch or read. Do so with intention. That was not a long point, so I'll try to be brief here. One trap that language learners fall into is that they watch shows and read books in their target language in the same way they do in their native language. This doesn't really work. Instead, with each show you watch, decide which of the 4 input modalities you're going to apply. These are primed listening, hybrid input, extensive input, and intensive input. Primed listening is a Migaku specific modality that takes advantage of how we let you modify subtitles in videos. In this playback mode, you will be using subtitles in your native language. The video will pause before each line of dialogue, let you review the subtitle for the next line of dialogue, then hide the subtitles and play the video. This is kind of like listening with training wheels. Before each dialogue line starts, you will see a translation of what is going to come in your native language. Understanding what is going to come next will help you to pick out words of what is being said. And maybe after a while of doing this, you will notice patterns of words that are associated with a certain translation, or just in languages that are more similar to English, you will be able to connect what was written in the translation in your native language to what is then being said when the person speaks. This means that at first it lets you see what you're going to hear, then requires you to use your ears to listen out for that. Hybrid input refers to watching content with target language audio and also target language subtitles. Basically, you're listening and reading at the same time. Migaku also lets you display 2 subtitles at once, so this gives you more options. For example, you can have target language subtitles always visible, but native language subtitles blurred until you mouse over them. This lets you do your best to follow the target language subtitles, but also makes it easy to double check the native subtitles when necessary. Extensive input refers to consuming as much content as possible within a period of time. The idea here is that quantity will eventually become quality. With this in mind, you have 2 main options. You can either focus on slightly easier content that you can follow without looking many things up, or you can consume harder content but just accept that you will be missing details because you aren't looking things up. This isn't to say that you can never look anything up, but if you're constantly looking things up or wanting to look things up, the piece of content you've selected is probably too difficult to make good extensive input for given your current level. Finally, intensive input refers to consuming content and literally stopping after every line of dialogue to figure out what it means. This takes a lot of energy and should be done in short bursts. This isn't something you do to enjoy the content, it's something you do to push your language boundaries. We actually have in-depth videos on how to do intensive reading and intensive listening, and you can find those in the description. Do your best to spend some time in each of these modalities. On days where you have more energy, watch a show intensively. If you have less energy, do hybrid input or extensive input. If you're really burned out, then go ahead and cheat. The goal here is simply to meet yourself where you are at and get as much value as you can possibly get out of content in your language, given your current ability, mood and energy levels. 7. How to learn grammar. The last key bit of advice I have to give is about grammar. I'm going to approach this in a way you might not have heard before, so bear with me. There's a saying that goes like this. First you don't know, then you know you don't know, then you don't know you know, then you know you know. Confusing, I know. Grammar is very similar. Your first task is simply to discover that a grammar point exists and what it means, that your target language has a way of expressing a particular idea. Now, you're aware of a bunch of things you don't know. How to structure or conjugate it, how it is different from some of the similar grammar point, whether it's used in speech or writing or is more or less formal, all sorts of stuff. For now, you're going to ignore all of that. Get a very basic idea of what a grammar point means and then focus on your input. As you input, you will see that grammar point used in hundreds of sentences, slowly picking up on the nuance it adds to a sentence, what sorts of sentences it gets used in, the sort of situations it's used in, and more. Somewhere along the line, without really realizing it, you will develop a pretty good understanding and intuition of how the grammar point in question works. Once you are at the stage where you can look at two extremely similar sentences and can feel that there is something different but can't really explain what, you are at a stage where you optionally can benefit from some grammar study. Even here, you don't really need to study grammar. You can simply continue with your usual input and you will keep improving. However, if you choose to study grammar, it will now be much more effective. When you revisit those long-winded explanations, comparisons of similar grammar points or words, using details and more, the examples provided will now mean much more to you. This often leads to these aha moments when something suddenly clicks. That sentence that felt different when you changed just one small thing, now you've had your aha moment. It clicked and you understand why it felt different. This kind of realization can really imprint the knowledge in your mind, making it much easier to remember. Learn grammar shallow at first, just enough to grasp the general meaning. Once you've become more advanced and have developed a good intuition, you can optionally revisit more detailed grammar explanations and benefit from them. Bonus points if you read these grammar explanations in your target language. It makes your study time even more efficient. 8. How to learn kanji. There's actually one thing I really want to share, but I'll call it a bonus, since it's only really relevant to Japanese and maybe Mandarin. Basically, I learned kanji by doing RTK. Remember the kanji. I learned the meanings of 3,000 kanji in 3 months by drilling flashcards for 3 hours a day. And it worked for me. It did what it was supposed to do. I became able to write the kanji from memory and had a rough idea of what they meant when I saw them. The thing is, just like vocabulary words, some kanji are used much more often than others. Learning 3,000 kanji was total overkill, and I was drained by the end, I can tell you. The moment I deleted those decks, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. If I were to start learning Japanese today, I go through the kanji in one of 3 ways. 1, I would do RRTK, which is a condensed version of RTK. It teaches the 1,000 most common kanji in the same format. This lets you get the majority of the benefit of RTK while cutting down on all this pork that you don't really need. That will only drain you with little benefit. There are many free Anki decks for RRTK, so this is accessible to anyone. If you're a bit more of a technical user, you can instead use Migaku's Kanji God add-on for Anki. You can read the instructions if you want, but the basic idea is that you mine sentences as normal, and then if Kanji got their text that you don't know one of the kanji within those sentences, it automatically creates kanji flashcards. This lets you learn the kanji as you encounter them, prioritizing the ones that are most important given your personal interests. The third and final option, the one I personally made, is Migaku's Kanji course. It is designed to be used in tandem with our Migaku Japanese Academy. Here's how that works. First, if you're totally new, you go through the Migaku Japanese Fundamentals course to learn hiragana and katakana. This will take about 10 days if you do 20 flashcards per day, then take a week to consolidate that knowledge. And please do go through it. If I get one more report about how some word in our academy course is wrong because I didn't read the lesson on bidaku in the fundamentals, I'm going to explode, I swear. Even if you can already read kana, at least skim through the lessons, I beg you. Next, you will learn 10 kanji per day with the Migaku Kanji course for 2 weeks. Here, you will learn about 800 kanji in the order they appear in our Japanese Academy, and you will learn them via the mnemonic approach just like RTK. After doing the kanji course for 2 weeks, you can move on to our Japanese Academy. This will teach you the 1,500 words you need to follow 80% of Netflix sentences. What's special about the course is that it consists entirely of one target flashcards, meaning that each flashcard contains only one thing you don't know. At the pace of 10 cards per day, it will take you about 7 months to finish. The result is that in just about half a year you will know the vocabulary, kanji and grammar you need to begin learning Japanese by consuming content you personally enjoy. So there you go. To briefly recap, focus on learning the most common words first. Use flashcards, but don't be an over-optimizer. You don't need to go abroad to learn a language. If you're struggling to break into your first piece of native content, consider forced mining. Consume media in your target language in a way that matches your current level, energy and mood. Learn grammar slowly over time in stages. And most importantly, the real way we make progress in another language is by consuming media we enjoy and understanding messages within that media. Every successful language learner has in one way or another spent a lot of time interacting with their language. That's all for today. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.